Nightmare Before Christmas was so beautifully executed. You couldn't complain about that for a second.
And was that similar to Edward Scissorhands in terms of there being drawings that Tim Burton had created, and those were sort of a springboard to create a narrative, or?
Well, Jack Skellington was definitely a creation of Tim's. He had written a poem parody of The Night Before Christmas. I think he's even published it since, years before, when he was at Disney. So he'd drawn Jack. His Sally looked more like the Corpse Bride. I mean, she was very... But when I got involved, which was actually pretty far down the road, I was like, well, I don't understand that kind of girl. I kind of get the little matchstick style girl. So we redesigned her. Tim wasn't terribly present, to be perfectly honest. I mean, he had script approval, but I don't know. Maybe he designed all those characters. I mean, Rick Heinrich seemed to be working on them, and Joe Ranft while I was involved. But I honestly can't answer that. I wasn't the first writer on the project, so I came in rather late.
And did you work at all with the director, I believe was Henry...
Selick?
Selick, yes. I think that was his first feature.
It was his first feature. Henry had been famous for making these interstitial things on MTV in the 80s, these funny little character, 60-second pieces. And I think he'd gone to school with Tim. I mean, there was a whole kind of Disney mafia and Cal Arts mafia, the John Lasseter, Henry, Tim, I don't know if Rick Heinrichs went there. But anyway, so lots of them ended up at Disney, at least briefly, including Tim. Henry was not the easiest person in the world to work with. Those animators are pretty OCD. But he and I ended up, years later, admitting to each other that we were really good friends. But it was a kind of combative experience. But, often it is with the screenwriter. People often think that you can, have something fast, slow, close, quiet, loud, all in the same moment. I mean, we're treated as if we can, pull magic out of our assholes. And we do our darndest to do that. But, movies take place in time. You can also only do one thing at a time. So It's a little tricky. Especially for a first-time director who really didn't know script and didn't know much about script.
Do you think it's more difficult in an animation form where everything is so specific when you're, because it's 24 frames a second, they really have to delve into each moment so deeply that it's sort of, like the director sort of tries to have so much control in an animation setting more so than in a live action? Or?
Well, you don't want to roll any footage you're not going to use animation-wise. So what really happens is that it's very, very intensely storyboarded. And then they do what's called an animatic from that storyboard, which is basically like a flip book. So they pre-visualize the entire film pretty much. I mean, it happens as the film is being shot. I mean, that was what was dodgy about The Nightmare Before Christmas, is that they were already shooting before they realized that they didn't have a script. Because the writer before me failed to turn anything in. And so they were sort of, and Danny had written all the songs.
The songs were finished.
Songs were finished, but the narrative was not. And if you examine it, Danny pretty much told the story in the songs. So it's like, oh, okay, well, what's left? And what's left is Sally's story. So if you examine it, he ended up writing a song for her, if not two. But you can see that it's sort of a strange, I liken it to a house people were living in while we were building it. It was sort of strangely constructed. But it worked eventually.
Definitely. And did you feel there was a certain tone that you wanted to capture in the story? Because it's so different than any other Disney feature animated film that was ever made up to that point. It was darker. It really sort of explored sort of a darker realm.
Well, I had the incredible experience of being on a panel at that same Austin Film Festival with John Lasseter, who said to me, you probably don't realize it, but Nightmare Before Christmas is responsible for Pixar getting to exist. Because up to that point, Disney had only made Disney movies. And they were so afraid of Nightmare, it wasn't a Disney movie, it was a Touchstone movie. They branded it differently because they were very gun shy.
Was that always from the beginning to make it a touchstone?
No.
No.
It was sort of gun shy. They didn't, it seemed darker and weirder and not for the little kiddies, though little kiddies adore it.
I mean, you go to Disneyland around Halloween and it's like, it's all Nightmare Before Christmas.
Oh yeah, of course.
It's like,
Yeah,
that's Disney.
of course it is. But at the time, they were
Yeah,
afraid
of
of
course.
it. So obviously it was because of Tim that it got to get made. It's Tim Burton's Nightmare Before Christmas. And they felt that they could take a risk on his name.